Hi, I'm Gail Bannock.
And I'm Alana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this. Okay, we are here today with Olivia Petrou. She is the founder and CEO behind the leading luxury charcuterie and food experience brand, Olive & Fig. Olivia left her corporate job in executive talent acquisition at Canadian Tire, which is where Alana and I first met her, mid-pandemic to start Olive & Fig, and she has not looked back since. Olivia, it is so nice to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. Last time we saw you, Alana and I saw you, you were a recruiter at Canadian Tire, and now you're doing this. I love your story. Please tell us, how you got started. Tell us your story.
I grew up in a Greek household where obviously food and gatherings were happening every week, whether it was with my large family or extended family and friends. That's what we did. And, food was the central offering of that. Having the upbringing of being Greek, it was a very traditional upbringing. My parents are first generation. Well, my dad was born in Greece, but my mom is first generation Greek. Their parents were born in the 1930s and came to Canada for, opportunity and a new life. And they took along with them their cultural upbringing and the traditions that they grew up with. So fortunately, my parents wanted me to have a different life. I was the first one in my family to go to university, but not very far. My grandmother, for example, she was told to wash my grandfather's feet when she got home.
Wow.
Yeah. So things like that, my aunt and uncle had an arranged marriage. My grandparents had arranged marriage. So generationally, I'm not very far from that way of thinking. And so only seeing that growing up and the relationships, my parents' friends also being Greek, I entered into a relationship very similarly in my early 20s. And when I went to university, first guy that paid me attention, he was my boyfriend. And I ended up marrying that gentleman, and he came from a very similar cultural background to me. And, I didn't know any better, but deep down, I didn't want that for myself. And then as my friends started getting more serious relationships, and even my sister, I was like, hey, their relationship doesn't look like mine. It's more equal. But I ultimately left that marriage under a year of marriage. And it was difficult to leave, not because of that person, mostly because of my parents. They're like, you can't get a divorce. You just got married. Don't you believe in the sanction of marriage? What is everybody going to say? And I really had difficulty with that for a long time. But, I left. We were living with my parents. I left. I lived in an Airbnb. And this was all happening while I worked at Canadian Tire in my first year.
Wow.
And I lived on my own, and I started, Life of Olivia. And I got a personal trainer. I had just started the new job at Canadian Tire as executive recruiter. And I very quickly fell into a new relationship with George, who is my now husband. But it didn't quite go very smoothly. In the beginning, I think I had to heal from that past relationship. And we did break up. And it was, I think, all of the emotions of both of these relationships ending and, just having been with someone for all of my 20s. I think I was 30 at this point. I had a very difficult time dealing with that and being alone. And as a result of that breakup, I told myself, Olivia, you have to find something extra in your life to do outside of work and outside of a man. So that's kind of where the journey toward Olive & Fig began. I was working with a lot of people at Canadian Tire and merchandising and consumer goods. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to white label a product. Canadian Tire makes it look easy. Let me think of a product. But I wasn't well versed in how to do that. It didn't bring me any fulfillment or passion. So I went on to the next thing. Like I said, I moved into my own space and I was really enjoying interior design. So I said to myself, I'm going to do home staging. I really enjoy interior design. But again, that didn't, bring me joy either. So I was in bed one day scrolling on Instagram and I saw all of these, it was called grazing at the time, grazing Instagrams in Australia. And it was being that it's so warm there for the majority of the year, these grazing tables were a huge phenomenon there. People were putting large amounts of food on a table, making it look beautiful. And I was like, wow, I can do that. I love that. Like I grew up like with large amounts of food and I like making things beautiful. So on June 1st, 2019, it was my niece's first birthday party and I made 2 charcuterie boards and I took some photos and was like, I need to do something with this. And I think the next day I was trying to think of a name. And as you know, my name is Olivia and it actually means olive tree. So, and it just so works out that I'm Greek also, all derived from Greece for the most part. And I was like, what goes well with olive? And I was like starting to research, trying to think about, my own upbringing. And I remember my grandfather had a fig tree growing up, like olive and fig. And I ran it by some of my friends and they're like, yeah, that's a great name. So I started an Instagram, called it Olive and Fig, and just started posting photos. And within a week of posting my niece's charcuterie boards, I had my first client. And George and I had started seeing each other again at this time because I had spent, half of the year focusing on myself and we were ready to reconnect. And he has helped me, of course, along the way while Olive and Fig was a side hustle. And it kind of just came from there. I went to another event, took more photos, posted on Instagram, and then just kept getting more clients through Instagram. And we're here today as a result of it just doing so well during the pandemic. George at the time, he turned 40 and was having, I don't want to say a midlife crisis, but it was the pandemic made people just really reevaluate their lives and what was important to them. And he's extremely passionate about food in the culinary world. I just like making things look beautiful. And he's like, do you want to quit your job? Like Olive and Fig seems to be doing so well in the background. You're still working at Canadian Tire, but this is taking off. I was like, oh man, my parents are going to be so upset with me. So
it's like you had a checklist with them of like all the ways to drive them crazy.
Exactly.
Next, quit your job.
Exactly. Very much so. And they obviously were not thrilled about it, but I think I was 32, 33. And they're like, you have a job with benefits. What if you get pregnant one day? How are you going to, survive and all that kind of stuff? And I was like, I'll be okay. And actually on my last day of work at Canadian Tire, I kept receiving calls from LA. And I'm like, who's calling me from LA? This is spam. And I decided to pick up and it was the ABC network. They were sending out grazing baskets to critics for the Emmys in the Toronto area. And they chose us as the Toronto.
Wow.
They were contacting people around the world and they chose us as the Toronto representative. So it was a sign for me, like, you know what, you're doing the right thing. And so that's
a good sign.
Yes.
That's a great sign.
Yeah. So that was our first big client. Then Bell Canada, we did a really fun, we were sending grazing boards paired with wine that they send us to their executive sales team when they were meeting with executives from Canadian Tire, any of their clients to wine and dine them virtually. So that was one of our big clients that year as well. And that's essentially the story in a brief nutshell. Yeah.
And how are you doing now?
You know what? I am so happy. I ended up marrying George. We eloped in Paris last year. So we've been married for a year and he is an equal to me. He is my number one supporter and couldn't be happier in business and in my personal life as well.
How are your parents doing?
They, I know they feel really badly for...
Are they okay?
They're okay. They're very happy for me. They've said to me, even when George asked for their hand, their hand in marriage, he did follow some traditional norms. They apologized to him, saying, I know we were tough on Olivia and we see the difference between the two relationships and we see how happy she is.
Oh, that's great.
So
such an incredible story.
Yeah, it's learning for everybody.
That's a great story. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so nice to see how far you've come, Olivia, because it's as Gail said, we had just seen you pre-pandemic, and this is like a whole new Olivia that we're talking to today. So it's great to see you. And in a way, you make it sound, I went through this, and then I got here, and the rest is history, right? But we hear all the time. I think it's something like 40% of people want to start their own business, but are too scared to. And I'm just curious, how easy was it? Were you scared? What made you actually feel that you could quit your job and start something this new and this different?
I was extremely scared and nervous. I would be lying to you if I'm, still not 100% confident every day that this business will continue to succeed. But I did allow the customers to show us that this is something that people are looking for. It is somewhat of a niche, and it continues to still be a niche. It is charcuterie delivery. We're kind of I call ourselves the Amazon of charcuterie, because you're able to order a charcuterie board today for delivery tomorrow. And it is a very kind of on-demand catering, which didn't exist at the time. There's a lot more now, and charcuterie board delivery wasn't a thing. And to know, I knew that I had tapped into something, and I just went with my intuition. I knew this was something, and the people online and our customers that were ordering from us were showing me that this was something that was going to be successful. I could just feel it based on the amount and the volume of interest that we were getting. Yeah.
Listening to your story, which I just love, it's so, it's a movie in terms of, the struggles. I can see, I feel so awful knowing now that you were going through this difficult time while we were working together and nobody knew, and you kept it so much to yourself, and you were so good at your job while going through all of it. And I think it's a good lesson to everybody. Nobody knows what other people are going through at any given point in time. And that's why we should all be nice to people. We were as an individual contributor doing a certain kind of work. And then, it's one thing to be, a lot of people start their own business as consultants, kind of doing the work that they're doing, and then just doing it for themselves, which is scary enough as it is.
Right.
But to then say, okay, I have this set of skills that I am using, and then now I'm going to pivot completely into something that doesn't even resemble what I do day to day or have been doing. How did you find the courage to do that? Like, where did you decide that I can do this? And even today, you run a team and you lead people, and you're doing all these other parts you're running all these parts of the business that you weren't educated to do, trained to do, taught to do. Where does that come from?
I think I have I've always wanted to fulfill what I believe is, my potential. And sometimes in corporate, you're not able to do more than you want to do. But what's great about having a business and, what I knew I was able to do is that when I wanted to make change or when I wanted to make something better, I knew that I had the power to do that in my own business. So I always had this power and this desire to excel in everything that I do, that I think that's driven the success of Olive & Fig and how it began, and what kept, I've always been competitive even with myself, that I was like, I can figure it out. I know how to make a Shopify website. I know how to get clients. And even if I don't, I'm going to figure it out. Of course, George is a great supporter. He's a perfectionist and a high achiever just like me. So we definitely have different strengths, but we both have the same end result.
And of all those things that you had to learn, what's the hardest part? What was the hardest part? What was the hardest thing that you were like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be?
I would say that kind of started when I realized the business was too big for myself and George. When it was just George and I made all the product and he wrapped and dealt with the delivery drivers. But there came a point where I was like, we can't do this. We can't scale if it's just me and you. So we needed to hire someone, ideally with culinary experience. And I never thought that, number one, I never thought Olive & Fig would become more than a side hustle. It kind of just happened, I think, as a result of the pandemic. I'm not sure if the pandemic didn't happen, I would likely still be at Canadian Tire or a corporation. of the same kind.
I have a feeling about you.
Yeah.
I think there was a fire burning in your belly.
Maybe. But we did end up hiring our first executive chef, Jamie, who's still with us to this day, almost 3 years with Olive & Fig. And I never thought I would be able to train and then have someone do what I did even better than I was able to do it. And that was a huge lesson for me, to be able to relinquish that control and put trust to a stranger, essentially. I'm like, you don't have the same emotional ties to this business as I do. You know, you could leave tomorrow, the risk. Exactly. But we are so lucky that she treats this business as if it's their own. I like to think, my background in recruitment to finding valuable and great employees.
That's a perfect segue. That was actually my next question for you around like, what do you take away from your experience in recruitment or anything in your past that you think that you apply to Olive & Fig in your role at Olive & Fig today?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously my customer service and recruitment abilities, am more of an introverted, I'm a listener. And I think that has proven to help me in my past career as an executive recruiter. And currently I allow people to speak and I absorb what they're saying, and you're able to very quickly determine if that person, I don't want to say the right fit, but if they're going to be of value to you as a business, or, in my case, Olive & Fig. And I think that specific skill that I inherently have has kept the team that we have. We all share similar values and are essentially hard workers and want to succeed in what we do.
I love that you talked about being an introvert, because I feel like I'm on a bit of a mission to prove to introverts that they can do anything. And I feel like the world is very friendly to extroverts who are out there and can sell themselves. And I'm an extrovert. And so it's kind of different for me. And I've had introverts on my team, and they some of them, at least, I don't want to write off all like introverts as the same, but I've had a lot of conversations with people on my team who feel that they are introverts, and they feel that is holding them back. And so I love that you are able to leverage your strength as an introvert and say, no, actually, it's because I'm an introvert that I can do this and that I can be successful. I love that.
Thank you. I once had a boss, my boss at Canadian Tire, actually, he said I had a quiet confidence, which I took as a compliment. So
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
There's nothing wrong with great listening skills. That's for sure. We could use a little bit more.
We had an old boss. Didn't he used to say, God gave you 2 ears and one mouth? Use them accordingly.
Exactly. So true. Olivia, I'm curious about your network. So you've talked about George being a big supporter, but most entrepreneurs that I've met have a broad network of people, or really anyone working in corporate or as an entrepreneur, have a network of people who have kind of helped lift them up when they encountered things that maybe weren't going well, or you were learning something new, or you needed to expand. I'm curious, do you have a network of people, or do you have a network of sounding boards in your life that help you on your journey?
You know what? I would say I do. Obviously, like you said, George, I have a good group of friends that have been very supportive and helped me along the way. I would say former colleagues and bosses. The place I worked previously to Canadian Tire, he was an entrepreneur. He owned his own executive recruitment firm. And obviously, he built his business from the ground up. He was previously a lawyer that decided to create his own executive recruitment business. So again, a very differing background. And he came from Montreal and he came here, and he was someone in the early stages that I spoke to and spoke with a lot. And I actually think about him. It was a very small business, and he taught me a lot because we work so closely together. And I often find myself thinking about him. What would Richard do in this scenario? And yeah, so he was a really great boss and a really great business person. I think about him a lot, but otherwise, we've always talked about, Olive & Fig needs, a board, and we meet for board meetings, and that is, a next step for us. But I have talked to, I guess, people who may not be close friends, but other entrepreneurs in the industry anytime I've been in a difficult place that I've reached out to them and everyone's always been helpful, or even other women in this industry in England or Chicago. We've always reached out to each other and asked each other questions. Everyone's not competitive because we're in different areas of the world. So we're all very helpful to each other.
I love what you've done with Olive and Fig and the way that you've been able to not only address the individual market, but also the professional, like the business side. I think actually that's so brilliant. And I think actually that's where I found out about it. I'm pretty sure I saw something on LinkedIn that you were holding a Shopify
Workshop.
Meeting,
Yeah.
charcuterie board. What do you call them?
A charcuterie board workshop. Yeah.
A workshop. Yeah. I think it's so smart. Yeah. And I think it's just another example, I think, of your creativity that you've applied to this business. And it's not just, just because you started at your niece's birthday doesn't mean that is the end of your world. And I know you have a lot of exciting plans for growth and where to go to next. Just as we kind of wrap up, what advice would you give your younger self? I feel like it's a question that we like to ask, but for you, I don't even know how you're going to answer it because you've gone through this whole journey that you were kind enough to share with us. So what kind of lesson or what kind of advice would you give your younger self today, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I've thought about this question a lot. I know I spoke about being an introvert and being more of a listener, but when I look back, in high school and even university, I was so quiet because I was afraid to speak. I was afraid of being judged for what I was going to say. And I think that, again, comes from my upbringing of, how's my dad going to react if I say something? Or, just being very cautious of everyone's emotions growing up, that I was just afraid to hurt someone's feelings by speaking or saying the wrong thing. And I wish that I put my needs first before thinking of others. I'm not saying don't be compassionate of others or empathetic, but just I needed to think for myself first and put my needs first. And I think I would have made better choices and maybe been presented with better or certain opportunities than I did. But having said that, I'm happy. I am so happy right now in my life that it's hard to say I would have changed something along the way to have get to that led me here. So it's hard to want to change something because you don't know if you change something where you end up.
The butterfly effect. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I can empathize with that. I think disappointing people or the fear of disappointing people is strong. And you don't have to be from a Greek background, first generation in order to feel that. I think we all feel pressure from society, from our parents, from ourselves to do the right thing, to follow the right path. And I know I feel that as well. And so I think that's incredibly brave. Yeah.
As do I. As do I. I think it's a universal feeling that we're all trying to overcome in some way.
Nobody knows the right path, and so it's even harder to make sure you're on it. And I think you're incredibly brave and very impressive. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. It's very inspiring, and I'm hungry. At this point.
And as someone who has experienced your charcuterie boards both at work and at home.
Yes.
Oh, thank you guys. Let me know
way.
anytime you need something.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Olivia. Olivia is just so inspiring. It's amazing to see how a person's life can be moving in one direction and the tide is strong and you can pull yourself out. And I think that's a huge lesson for me of just because you are where you are and you think you're going down a certain path, you can change your trajectory at any moment. And it's scary, but it's okay. And sometimes it works out, might not, but even then I feel like there's no regret.
I think for me, when I listen to Olivia talk, I think we always underestimate the amount of work it takes to do what you just talked about, like the trajectory. It's almost like you see the output from the outside, but you don't see the actual middle. I loved what she said about, how she kind of had to step back and she had to try things and she had to see what worked, what was her passion and really reflect. And it took getting up every morning and thinking differently. It took, solo trips. It took introspection. It took like getting comfortable with yourself to know what was true to yourself. And I always think about, it's that work behind the scenes to get yourself to where you want to be that is sometimes underestimated, but it's so critical to being able to be successful. And I really take that away because I think when you want to make a change in your life, that work that you have to do is so important. And the consistency of that work over a prolonged period of time is really what's going to enable your success. It's not getting up and doing yoga for 5 days and then all of a sudden you're a new person. It's that consistent effort to really understand
pushing through it, whether you are depressed or and by the way, still showing up for work.
Exactly.
So, still, it doesn't mean that everybody has an eat, pray, love. Everybody's going to India and leaving their life. Sometimes you have to do that work while life goes on. That's and you have to pay the bills. And that's not a reason to not do it.
I also thought what Olivia said about this delegation thing, this feeling of, I don't know if I can trust someone else. I can't tell you how many times I hear, I'm like, well, why are you doing that? Why don't you get someone on your team to, they won't, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Versus saying, okay, well, what would it take for that person to do that as well as me? Like, is it the trust? Is it the coaching? Is it the articulating what you need? That relinquishing of the control, but the scaling of what is possible. That is a lesson for all of us. The power of numbers and trust and coaching of each other so that we can scale. It's a huge lesson. I think it was a microcosm for her in that first hire in her own business. Yeah. But I think it's applicable to basically anywhere in
100%. And I think it's a combination of it's okay if it's not 100%. 90 is great. 88 is good too. And then also you can get someone to 100% or to 98, and that's okay. Yeah. And it's believing both of those because you just can't do it all yourself. And also she even said it. She did it better. The person she hired did it. So everybody thinks they're all so great, but actually maybe you're not the best at it.
Exactly. Happened many times to me before where I've given something to someone and I'm like, whoa, I'm glad I gave that to you because it's way better than I could have done it myself. So
exactly.
Just so many rich lessons from that conversation and just a very impressive and inspirational conversation with her.
Definitely. All right, I got to go get myself one of those boards. It's Olive and Fig boards and start eating.
Totally.
Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.